Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 22 of the podcast, and I'm recording this right before I travel to London. I've got a really fun guest for you guys today who should give a pretty good glimpse into what the Vikings have this weekend in the Jets. A very interesting breakdown by Zack Rosenblatt, who covers the team for us at The Athletic, so it was pretty awesome to have him on before we both fly to London. Like I said on the last episode, if you're headed out there, let me know. Would love to maybe meet up with some of you guys. I'm not going to do anything very formal, official, because I'm going to be bouncing around the pubs or what have you, but really looking forward to being out there. The one guy I'll say before, and I'm not going to do a crazy intro here, the one guy that we didn't talk much about, that as I watched the film, I was like, this Jets running back, Braylon Allen. Like, obviously, Breece Hall was the fantasy guy this year, but as I watched the film, Braylon Allen, I believe, is a rookie from Wisconsin. I don't even know when they drafted him. I probably should have looked that up before we got on here. But this guy is slithery. He has good vision. He finds holes. He looks as explosive as Breece Hall, which, again, like, blew me away as I was watching the film, but I just couldn't take my eyes off this guy. And every time I saw an effective run, I'm like, was that Breece? No, it was Braylon Allen, and it looked like Rodgers kind of liked him. So just a guy to watch on Sunday, and the Vikings have been really good at stopping the run, as we will talk about in this episode. But just was on my mind as I was watching him, like someone that the Vikings cannot overlook, and I imagine they won't. So, yeah, that's what I'll say. Again, headed out to London, so not going to waste a ton of your time. If you're a first-time listener, I really appreciate you guys being here. If you can, like and subscribe. It helps the channel out, and it's been fun growing this thing throughout, the course of the last couple months. I've really enjoyed it, and, yeah, it's been fun. So without further ado, here is Zack Rosenblatt, our Jets writer at The Athletic. All right, Zack, welcome to the Alec Lewis Show. How you been?
Oh, never a dull moment in Jets land. Right before we got on here, Davante Adams became available, so that's all any Jets fan cares about right now.
Yeah, we scheduled the time, and then you're like, "Are you okay if I write this Devante?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's the nature of this business, and specifically covering that team and that market. Like, I would hope you would put aside the Alec Lewis Show for a Davante Adams story."
The Alec Lewis Show is a priority in my mind, but it's fine.
That's good. That's good to hear. So I guess I'll just be the first one to probably ask you, and nobody on Twitter has ever tossed this out to you, but like Davante Adams to the Jets? ? What do you feel? What do you think about that conversation in general? Given you just spent an hour and now I'm making you rehash what you wrote.
No, it's fine. It's fresh on the mind. It's felt inevitable since the Raiders situation became a mess and since Aaron came to the Jets. Like, Aaron has pretty blatant, maybe they wouldn't be able to prove it, but he's pretty blatantly, tampered. I don't know if it counts as tampering, but, they hung out, the day before the Raiders and Jets played last year. They talk, Rodgers had this moment on the golf course in Tahoe where, a reporter asked him something about Devante, and he's like, I'm looking forward to reunite playing again with Devante. And he was asked about it later. He's like, I think I was talking about golf. So they both have known that this was a possibility, and Adams has tried to play it down. I'm not trying to leave the Raiders. Everybody knew he was going to want to leave. Their quarterback situation is maybe the worst in the league. So it just seems so obvious. And if the Jets are truly as all in as they say they are, and this Broncos last game was a bad one, but if they're as all in as they say, and they're all in on it, making Rodgers happy and all that stuff, it makes a lot of sense. And Garrett's had a lot of difficulty, beating number one corners lately. And you bring Devante in, and it's kind of hard to double either of them. So they have other needs that I think are bigger. But, I would say that the Jets are the favorite to acquire him. I don't know if they will, but I think they're the favorite.
It's funny. Two things off that. One, when the Adams news became official, I got a message from my editor, would the Vikings be interested? I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, Devante, Justin, Jordan Addison, and
oh my God.
No, it was absolutely hilarious to think about that. The second thing is you mentioned Tahoe, and Harrison Smith, if I'm not mistaken, Harrison Smith, who's longtime Vikings corner, potential Hall of Famer, he and Aaron actually played together in Tahoe, and I was talking to Harrison about it a little bit last week, and I think those two are pretty close. They've had some back and forth over time. But we could,
I think Harrison has the most interceptions against him of anybody. Actually, I was researching that recently.
that feels correct. And Harrison, like Harrison's always messing with them. They've messed with each other. I watched film with Harrison before the season, and
Yeah, that was awesome.
I can't. He told me something about how before one Packers game, Aaron like walked him over to the line or something like that, and Harrison was like, "This guy is ridiculous." But there's a lot of respect, I think, from Harrison to Aaron and how he goes about it. Let's just start there. Like, I mean, obviously Aaron Rodgers is healthy. That breaking news here on the Alec Lewis Show. But just what has it been like watching him through these first 4 weeks? How would you assess just what I mean, his performance, just in general? What have you thought about how he's looked?
Yeah, I think the first 2 weeks he looked like 70% of Aaron Rodgers. Like he looked a little hesitant, like he was still not fully like he was still testing out the Achilles. And so I thought, if it's still 70% of Aaron Rodgers, the Jets are probably still in pretty good shape. Like if you would have taken that last year, certainly. And so like, it was more like flashes of the Aaron Rodgers of old. Whereas I think the last 2 weeks, even in this really bad Broncos game, like he's moved like he used to. Like that's not something I did not expect. And so, I think he's really taken control of this offense, and they have a lot of issues still, especially with the Garrett Wilson stuff. Like there's just something off between the two of them. But, he's reconnected with Alan Lazard. The offensive line's played pretty well. He's getting rid of the ball really quickly, which maybe is a little different than when he was younger. And he was kind of like his whole thing was letting the play develop and, getting out of the pocket. But I think I've been surprised by his mobility and his willingness to run and stuff like that. And so I think he's looked like one of the 10 to 12 best quarterbacks in the NFL. Weirdly, they have more questions on defense than they do on offense, probably. If you just think that Breece Hall and Garrett are going to figure it out, like then they have more questions on defense. But yeah, I think he's been pretty good. And if he keeps playing the way he is, then they should at the very least be competing for the playoffs. This Broncos game was concerning because it felt like the Jets of 2023, where the defense did their job, the offense just kept on shooting itself in the foot. Same problems again and again. And so I was very concerned. It feels like a turning point right now because they're about to hit a hard part of the schedule with how good the Vikings are. And they have the Bills after that, Texans coming up, Steelers coming up, like some really good defenses coming up. So we're really going to find out what this team's ceiling is. But Aaron Rodgers has looked like Aaron Rodgers, which, nobody knew what he was going to look like because it's been so long since we've seen him.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, this Broncos game, and I told you before we got on, I haven't dug into it as much as I probably will before these two teams play this weekend, but like just observing the box score and kind of just watching and reading a little bit of your stuff and observing some of the narrative, it felt like, I mean, there were some cadence issues in the game. Obviously, I know there was the whole back and forth with Robert Saleh and Aaron Rodgers, and it was funny. Brian Flores, the Vikings defense coordinator, was asked about it Tuesday. He's like, I think I'm going to go off the 20 years of Aaron Rodgers absolutely dominating with cadence and think that that's probably the route they will go. But specific to that game, like what was it that was the issue? I mean, you mentioned like his mobility, the way he looked. It sounds like he specifically could perform. So part of me wonders, was it just the offensive line is just not in sync? And then, I mean, we'll get into Garrett Wilson, but I guess part of me just thinking about Brian Flores and his ability to attack protections, I've thought a lot about this Jets offensive line. So I kind of know how they fared against Denver and then what you think about them as a whole.
It's pretty fascinating that the Vikings are the team coming right after the Broncos because, especially because just defensive style wise, because the Broncos blitzed like a lot and the Jets were not ready for it, frankly. Like I think the most concerning part of this game is they had 10 days of rest and it felt like they didn't prepare, frankly. Like they were not ready for the blitzing. The offensive line took a step back. There was 5 false starts. And they hadn't really had an issue with the operation, which is why I think the cadence thing's been a little overblown. But I think it was more just – I think they were a little – like Breece Hall had a quote about feeling like a little antsy, I think, about the blitz coming. And so it just felt like they were not ready for what the Broncos threw at them. Vance Joseph definitely outcoached Nathaniel Hackett. I don't think that's a shocker to anybody. But I would say that, it was – the concern was the way they handled the blitz. They have a rookie and a right tackle who never played right tackle before. They had to plug him in because Morgan Moses got hurt. Olu Fashanu looked really good throughout the summer, including at right tackle. It was his first game. Like, I don't think it'll be like that every week, but rookies in the NFL, you never know how quickly they're going to adjust. So that's an area that the Vikings will be able to probably will try to attack, try and throw them off. But yeah, I think the offensive line through 3 games was arguably one of the team's biggest strengths. Like, it looks like on paper a group that's pretty solid. Tyron Smith seems like he's maybe on the downswing, but when he's healthy and at his best, he's still very good. They have a second-year center, Joe Tittman's pretty solid. Elijah Vera Tucker has looked really good. John Simpson at left guard's been solid. So it's a good group. They did not play well last week, though, and I'm less concerned about the O-line than how Breece Hall has played and how Garrett Wilson has played, frankly. But I think we're going to find out pretty quickly if they learned any lessons from how they handled the Broncos, because Brian Flores is going to bring the heat on them, I would think. And that would be the way I would do it, especially, you stack the box for Breece and he's not really handling it very well. And Garrett Wilson, you put your best corner on him and you shade over a safety every now and then. It seems like that's all you have to do. So I think the formula is out there on how to stop this offense. The Broncos showed it. And we're going to find out how Aaron and Nathaniel Hackett can adjust to that kind of thing.
It's interesting you mentioned Vance Joseph and like the similar styles. I was looking earlier today at where the Vikings ranked in terms of run defense, and they're like top 3 in the NFL. And I think the best team in the NFL stopping the run right now is the Broncos. And the similarities between those two teams are they both blitz a lot on early downs. And Brian Flores has done that since he got here, where it's like they will align 6 guys on the line of scrimmage, so finding gaps in the run is difficult, but then they will bring those guys off the edge, and Kevin O'Connell always like terms it edge pressure type stuff, which they do on early downs. The Garrett Wilson thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but entering this year, I feel like many people across the NFL, everybody fantasy-wise, thought that this dude was going to be, as elite of a talent of an option as possible. So, is it like that he and Aaron are not on the same page? Is it he doesn't look as explosive? Can you put your finger on why he has not performed at the level that I think everybody expected?
Yeah, it's been surprising, but I think it's pretty easily diagnosable to me. To your initial point, he put up 2 years of 1,000 yards with arguably the worst quarterback situation in the league over the last. The Vikings had a pretty bad one last year, but they at least had Kirk Cousins for some of it. He was getting passes thrown to him from Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian, just Chris Streveler, just a legion of not good quarterbacks, and he put up numbers still. So the assumption is you bring Aaron Rodgers in, some stability, some talent, he's going to take off. But what we saw this summer was that their chemistry was just a little bit off for a lot of the summer. It seemed like by the end they were figuring it out, but the problem is Garrett, the way he plays and the reason why he's been so successful is he uses his athleticism and kind of his awareness to improvise a little on his routes when he sees that he gets open that way. That's how he's kind of always operated. Whereas Aaron Rodgers needs his guys to be where they're supposed to be. That's kind of how Aaron Rodgers lives. And that's, why he had such a great connection with Devante and Lazard and Cobb and all these guys all those years, because they just knew if you go where you're supposed to be, Aaron's going to get you the ball. And so they have not been able to find the balance between those things. And I think part of it, I think Garrett's probably a little frustrated because he's had these number one corners going against him every week, and he's been doubled and all this stuff. They're really shading, the coverage towards him. But the reality is you want to be taken seriously as number one receiver. You have to beat those guys. And so there's not on the same page. There was towards the end of the game. Well, Garrett's first catch, he fumbles away. Aaron doesn't look his way again until the third quarter. And then in the fourth quarter, they're trying to drive up. They have a chance to take the lead. There's 2 passes in a row. One of them, Aaron throws it somewhere where Garrett's supposed to be, and Garrett is basically still running down the field. You didn't even see it. So clearly he went the wrong way. Aaron glares at him. There's just clearly a disconnect between those guys that has been going back to the summer. And it's a little bit alarming. Aaron still has his connection with Lazard because Lazard knows where he's supposed to be. So Lazard's having a pretty good year so far. But, you think the talent will win out. The Devante stuff is an interesting wrinkle, and I do wonder how Garrett feels about that. But, yeah, it's mostly a concern because it's been something that's been going on since the summer. If we had all this evidence of them playing great together, which they did, their talent just overcame it all in practice, when the bullets weren't real. And so we'll see. I think they're not going to play shut down corners every week. I'm not as well versed with the Vikings. I know they have Stephon Gilmore now. He's looked, I imagine, pretty good, but he's not like a Patrick Surtain, Christian Gonzalez, L'Jarius Sneed probably type level. So I would think it would get a little bit easier in the coming weeks, and then we'll really see if he's ready to kind of revert back to the Garrett that we know.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Stephon Gilmore, and like it doesn't feel like Stephon's been tested a ton, and that's partially a byproduct of the way they play. Like they don't just man guys up and press guys. It's a lot of like quarters stuff on early downs with like some different coverage principles. A lot of Tampa too. So like, but I will say, I mean, at least against the Packers, like when Jordan Love was able to buy time and able to find time to throw the ball down the field, like there were pockets of space. So I do wonder, like, if Garrett can use his awareness and athleticism to just find grass at Tottenham Stadium, like who really knows? So it is interesting though. Like as a fan, I remember, or as like an NFL person, kind of like the people reading this, like or listening to this, excuse me, like people, I'm sure saw like in training camp, them going back and forth. And I kind of thought that was just like two competitors having a good time.
You assume that,
Yeah. But I mean, you never know, I guess. It's interesting. I want to flip over to the defense real quick because it was interesting when you say you feel like you almost have as much concern with the defense as you would, or maybe more than the offense. Where does that concern like fixate on, if it's a specific position or just the defense entirely?
The biggest concern is edge rusher and the pass rush. They obviously the Hassan Reddick situation, it's kind of just floating in the background right now, and it's despite the fact that it's maybe the most insane holdout that's ever happened. Like it's just kind of like you have the Devante thing, and actually as we're talking, like Garrett Wilson had some quotes on a radio show kind of complaining about the offense. So it's just never a dull moment around here. But yeah, they traded away John Franklin Myers. They let Bryce Huff walk in free agency. They traded for Hassan Reddick, and they brought back Jermaine Johnson, who was a Pro Bowler last year. Well, Hassan Reddick hasn't shown up since his intro presser. Jermaine Johnson tore his Achilles in week 2. And so they're left with Will McDonald, who they drafted in the first round last year, Michael Clemens, who was a 4th-round pick in 2022, and then a bunch of like journeyman undrafted rookies. Like it's really not an exciting group. Will McDonald has 5 sacks. He's done pretty good job of pressuring. Hasn't really gone against like an elite tackle since week 1 when Trent Williams kind of shut him down. But they didn't pressure Bo Nix at all. And Bo Nix only had 60 yards, and the Jets only won by 1 point. But like they really did not. They had 4 pressures, I think, from defensive linemen, and 3 of them were from Will McDonald. They have Quentin Williams in the middle, and Javon Kinlaw's been like okay next to him. But the D-line, which has been a strength of this team for a few years, does not feel like that anymore. They just don't have the talent at defensive end that they used to. And a big thing that they do is they rotate, and the idea is they're constantly bringing heat. And so it's required Jeff Ulbrich to get a little more creative. Like this is not a guy he really does not blitz at all. Like the Jets defense is predicated on the guys winning up front. And that's the same thing as with the 49ers. Like he brought that from over there. Like they're predicated on everybody just like winning their assignments. And so it allows them to get maybe a little more creative on the back end. But, against the Titans and the Patriots, I think they blitzed more than Ulbrich had in his entire tenure. And, maybe that's what I imagine that's what they'll do against Sam Darnold, because if you look at him historically, he doesn't do great when he's getting pressured a lot. But yeah, they just don't have the juice off the edge. They have a great secondary, maybe the best cornerback trio in the league. Their linebackers are very, very good, but up front has been a little bit of a problem so far.
Is Quentin Williams, I mean, like you mentioned him a little bit, but is it that opposing offensive lines are paying so much attention to him because they don't have to pay as much attention to the edge that has maybe limited him, or have they not limited him? I mean, I before we got on, like I was looking at some of the pressure stuff, and it just, to your point, it doesn't feel like he's been as impactful as I think we are conditioned to think a guy who's paid that much and has been as impactful as has been. Is that wrong, or what? I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think he already was getting like double and triple teamed, and I think that's probably been emphasized even more, that there's not really as much talent around him. So I think that's been an issue. I think he's definitely making an impact. It's just maybe not showing up as much on the stat sheet as you kind of needed to for a guy that is making as much money as he is. But he's not someone I'm really concerned about. I think the fact that he's not really getting help is going to impact his ability to, get to the quarterback. But it's the rest of the guys around him. Like they don't have anyone you can count on as consistent down to down like force. And even next to like Kinlaw's been like fine, but other than that, they're playing Solomon Thomas like a lot of snaps, and he probably is not meant for doing that. And they have these undrafted rookies. They're trying to figure out if any of these guys are any good. Like I don't know if they're going to make a move at some point, but it's their defensive end group and their defensive line in general. Like they're just not really getting off blocks very well, especially in the running game. So that's something I have my eye on, especially this week. Aaron Jones has been pretty good, obviously, and if you're going to let Sam Darnold have all the time in the world, then he's probably going to make some big throws. So if they don't get pressure, then they're going to have some trouble.
I mean, that was exactly where my mind has gone. I mean, both Aaron Jones has been effective, and then like this Vikings offense faced two similar defensive structures in the 49ers and the Texans, and they were able to move those defensive lines vertically in both those games. And so part of me looking at how the Jets have struggled against the run and the Vikings' ability to run the ball against similar type structures, it kind of feels like a spot, especially with how good the Jets' pass defense is, as we're talking about, where it just could just be a big Aaron Jones day. Like, just would not surprise me. It sounds like you would agree, probably.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the 49ers basically just ran it down their throat. They didn't even throw it, and they just dominated the time of possession. And that's kind of how teams have beaten this defense in general over the last couple of years. It's a lot of like getting rid of the ball quickly, not letting them win their one-on-ones, quick passes, and kind of, they've been able to get run on even when their defense is at its best. So I imagine that'll be the formula. And then, Darnold taking some shots down the field. Sauce and DJ Reed are an elite cornerback duo, and they've both played very well so far. But, if the running game is as effective as it was like for San Francisco, then you're able to like sneak in some big shots down the field too.
I love DJ Reed. I mean, the cornerback.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, everybody talks about Sauce rightfully, but I just feel like DJ Reed nationally, like, no, he doesn't really get much hype, but he's just consistent, seemingly year in, year out. Like, it's a guy who, and frankly, against this Vikings pass catching unit with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, like with Jalen Naylor's ascent, this pass catching group has become, I mean, I think internally they believe they have one of the best receiving cores in the NFL, and it's hard to argue that when you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. So pretty interesting dynamic there.
Yeah.
I mean, part of me wonders, like, just what is your vibe as you think of? I mean, like, what do you think the vibe is from the fans? Like, is this do you look at this Vikings team right now and what they've accomplished, and you're like, this is going to be just tough sledding? Like, how do you view it?
Yeah, I do. I think if you looked before the season, I imagine a lot of fans are looking at the Vikings as like that should be a win in theory, like at least on paper. And then as the season's progressed, I think that's changed quite a bit where, like I said, now this looks like the hardest stretch they're going to have this season. They have Vikings this week, Bills on Monday night, Steelers on Sunday night, Patriots, and then Texans. And they have a couple other, like, I think they get the Seahawks like after a bye a couple weeks after that. Like it's a really tough stretch, especially in terms of like the defenses they're going against. So I'm concerned, especially because of Brian Flores, whether he blitzed or not, just like his mind matching wits with Nathaniel Hackett. Like, Rodgers technically too, but you're going to take Flores in that matchup anyway. And then the fact that they did not handle the blitz very well last week is concerning. Like Rodgers got hit, I think something like 14 times, like something crazy like that. And he's feeling sore in his knees, he said on McAfee today. So they're going to be trying to come at him and hit him and knock him down. And if the Jets O-line plays like it did last week, then it could be a long day. And the Vikings have a better the Vikings defense and the Broncos defense are probably pretty close to each other because I think the Broncos have a very good defense, but the Vikings are very far ahead of them on offense, especially you have O'Connell calling the plays. You have Darnold slinging it like the way he is. You have Justin Jefferson, like you said, the Broncos have nobody like that. Jordan Addison's probably the number one receiver on the Broncos. Aaron Jones, very good running back, better than Javonte Williams. Like it's a better version of the Broncos, and so that's why I'm a little concerned about this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing for the Vikings defense that would concern me just thinking about it is Rodgers' ability, and Brian Flores mentioned this today, but Rodgers' ability to kind of trap defenses by using tempo in specific personnel groupings. And it was something that the Packers and Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love did last week, where they recognized that the Vikings had 4 edge rushers on the field, and they converted a first down and kept that group in run-specific downs. And Rodgers, I think, is sharp enough to be identifying that stuff on the fly. So I'll be interested. I also, he does so much signaling on the field, right? So, part of me wonders, the Vikings are such a check-based defense. Can he kind of counteract that with his own mind. I think it could maybe diffuse things, but I would agree with you. They're probably going to, for as mobile as you said he's been, they're probably going to very much test that early on. And I will also say in the second half against the Packers, the Vikings got, I don't want to say passive, but they were a little less aggressive than usual. And so there's probably going to be want to be an establishing of that pressure and kind of suffocation that they've shown throughout the first part of this season. So it should be very interesting. I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'll let you get out of here and write about Garrett Wilson's comments, obviously. But what has covering Aaron Rodgers, this is just a nerdy journalism, the people listening to this, but like, what has covering Aaron Rodgers been like compared to maybe what you would have expected it to be like?
I don't even remember at this point what I expected. It feels like I've been covering him for my entire life, even though it's only been a year. And I've only covered 4 games, really, if you think about it. But it's just fascinating. Like, everything carries a little more weight, a little more attention because he's involved. Like, if Zach Wilson or Mike White said the same things Aaron Rodgers says, like, nobody's paying attention to it, but it's Aaron Rodgers that says it, and everything he does gets attention. Like, sometimes I wish he would just let me take a breath and like not have to worry about, especially in the off season when he's going on all his podcasts and all that stuff. But in terms of like watching, like I've had the displeasure of watching a lot of bad quarterback play. So like watching a quarterback who knows what he's doing out there, like I've covered Zach Wilson. I mean, all the other quarterbacks the Jets have had. I covered Daniel Jones
earlier. I was like, that's what
Chris
a poll.
Trevler.
Yeah, it was a good poll.
Chris Trevler. I mean, Daniel Jones I covered with the Giants. Carson Wentz as he started going on his downswing. Like, it's been a while since I watched like a good quarterback. So I would say there are more eyes on my work, which is a very positive thing. More interest in people listening to my dumb voice on the radio and whatever. But I mean, it's been fun. It's been interesting, and hopefully they're a winner because it's just better when you're covering a winning team, as you know. Like 4-0 is a whole lot better than 1-3. So
it is interesting. It's like, people like friends, they always like, do you root whatever? And like, the answer that we give on that stuff. But it is like, can you sit down with a coach? Can you sit down with a player and then be much more open and willing to share more of the stuff that I think you and I both enjoy learning and writing? So, it's been over here, as I said before we started recording, it's been a wild ride for sure. And I'm sure it won't slow down as this game will be happening across the pond. So, that'll do it for me. Zach, appreciate you hopping on. We will grab a pint or something that they call it over
Absolutely.
there. Looking forward to being over there. But I will see you out there soon. Enjoy whatever news bubbles in the next X amount of hours before this podcast runs, because that will happen. But appreciate it, Zach. Thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, good talking to you, buddy.
And that'll do it for the Alec Lewis Show. I appreciate you guys listening. Hope you got something out of that. I'd be curious what you guys thought about what Zach had to say. You can let me know in the comments anything that stood out to you. But again, appreciate you guys listening. As I said at the top, the guy I'm watching is Braylon Allen. If you've missed some of our stuff at The Athletic, lot going on over there. Friday should have a pretty fun story to you guys that I think is perfectly well timed, frankly. And then might bounce around London, do some kind of scene piece, fan-oriented type story there. So I'm kind of, I would say, grasping, putting my mind around what would be fun to read for you guys. So working on that over there. In the meantime, like I said at the top, please like and subscribe. Looking forward to this one. It's going to be interesting for the players' circadian rhythms, for my own circadian rhythms, for the potential rain. There's a lot going on. But as always, that is the Alec Lewis Show. We will be back next week during the bye week. Going to try to do a couple shows from maybe across the pond. So should be pretty fun. Appreciate you guys listening. Enjoy the game on Sunday.